Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out my show. Really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. You can also listen to the show if you'd prefer. I'm on all the podcast apps, Apple, Spotify. I really appreciate all of your support. There is this really wild murder investigation that has been playing out in the suburbs of San Antonio, Texas over the last year. I was just going through all of the court paperwork and I'm surprised this has not gotten more attention. There's been some news stories, but I mean, it is just a really messed up case. And there is now a trial date that has finally been set for the suspect. So I figured now would be a good time to catch you all up on the case because we're definitely going to be hearing a lot more about the case soon. Especially one of the weird things about it is the victim's body has never been found, but her DNA has been found on a power saw of all places. So that sort of gives you an idea of just how messed up all of this is. And I'm going to get into all of it. Again, this is going to be a deep dive on the case. The victim is a wealthy Olmos Park realtor. She's a mom of 4. Her name is Suzanne Simpson. And last month marked the 1-year anniversary since her disappearance. Her husband, Brad, is the man now charged with her murder. And he finally has a tentative trial date set for February 13th of next year. So not that far off. It's just a couple of months from now. This case is really just loaded with details. So let me start for you from the very beginning. Suzanne was last seen on the evening of it was Sunday, October 6, 2024, a little over a year ago, like I mentioned, attending a party at a place called the Argyle Club in Alamo Heights with her husband, Brad, and their little 5-year-old daughter. This is all according to the arrest affidavit, but apparently they were not having a very good time. Witnesses say the couple got into, quote, a verbal altercation, some kind of fight at the party, and that Suzanne took off with her daughter, leaving her husband, Brad, behind. After she left, Suzanne called her mom, told her that Brad had actually assaulted her and that he had hurt her arm, that he'd hurt her back and also hurt her neck. And later, detectives would also learn that there may have been a history of abuse here. I mean, shocker there. I'm going to get to all of that in a bit, the whole history, and there's a lot there. But Suzanne, she takes off from the party, from this country club around 8:30 p.m. She's spotted on security footage at an H-E-B supermarket with her daughter. That was around 8:40 p.m. Then calls her friend to say that she's coming over. Her car was then spotted on surveillance video at the friend's house. That was 9:25 p.m. that evening. And it was on this drive that she called her mom and told her what happened at the party. And this is where things really start to get weird. It was around this time that Suzanne's cell phone company cut off her service. And they say it was at the request of the subscriber. Very strange. Authorities believe it was actually Brad, the husband, who did this, because then he told them a story about how she had lost her phone at the grocery store. Apparently, Brad didn't know that Suzanne used the Find My Friends feature with her family because they were able to show detectives a screenshot that put Suzanne's phone back at the family's $1 million home. That was around 10:22 p.m. I don't know why my dog just got up. Scout. Are you okay? Lay back down. Lay down. You're fine. All right, anyway, back to they have this $1 million home. They got back there around 10:22 p.m. The phone's very last known location was the house. 10:22 p.m., also perfectly aligned with the time that a neighbor tells police that he saw Brad and Suzanne loudly arguing. That's the way he put it. That was the quote from the police report. Loudly arguing and in a physical struggle in the front yard before Suzanne took off running towards the woods with Brad right behind her. And then he says he heard a scream. The neighbor says he heard a scream. And that same neighbor would also report that he heard Brad's truck leave and that was around an hour later and then return an hour after that. Authorities also note in the affidavit that Brad's phone was not very helpful to detectives because it had apparently been intentionally turned off and then on and off right around that time, allegedly to prevent it from collecting any data. So that was the night that Suzanne went missing, and judging by the evidence authorities say they have that's in the affidavit, the next day doesn't look much better for Brad's case either. The next morning, Brad's truck was seen dropping his daughter off at a child care center and then also at a Whataburger. Both places, of course, have security cameras, and that footage revealed really some very, very interesting items in the back of Brad's truck. And while not necessarily proof of a crime, just use your imagination here, okay? I use the word interesting, but these are pretty damning because here's what was back there. 3 trash bags, a large heavy-duty trash bin, an ice chest, and get this, there was also a large, bulky item wrapped in a tarp with a firewood rack on top of it to hold it down. Those 2 stops were both made before a stop to Home Depot. How many times, you think about this, have we seen something like this play out before where there's Home Depot involved? I can think of several cases just like this. So using cash, of course, Brad buys 2 bags of cement, a bucket, a box of heavy-duty trash bags, a bottle of Clorox disinfectant spray, and he also buys some bug spray. And then he moves on, and his next stop is the dump. And then when Brad goes to pick up his daughter from daycare, surveillance video actually shows the blue tarp and the firewood rack. They are no longer in the truck. Brad makes one more stop after the daycare. He goes to a car wash where he can be seen. He's like cleaning the driver's side and also the front seat and the passenger left side. Now about 4:35 p.m., the day after Suzanne Simpson was last seen, Brad sends a text to a man named James Val Cotter. And Cotter and Brad, by the way, they've been friends for like 25 years. And in that text, he writes, "If you are in Bandera, can you haul ass and meet me at your house? I don't have much time." And then Cotter says that he will be there in 40 minutes. And then Brad replies, "Okay, make sure and leave all that SHIT into the pump house, especially the gun." So without context, it's hard to really understand what a lot of this means. But later, Cotter would be charged with possession of a prohibited weapon and also tampering with evidence with the intent, according to police, to actually impair the investigation. So take that at what you will. I mean, again, strange circumstances here. So the text exchange happened. That was at 4:35 p.m., like I mentioned. And then at 8:31 p.m., Cotter texts Brad, "Get over here. I won't tell anyone." I mean, he literally texted that. "Get over here. I won't tell anyone." So that's a little strange. Okay, moving on now to the Tuesday following Suzanne's disappearance, when a sheriff's deputy goes out to find Brad with a search warrant. I mean, this is crazy. And he is literally standing by a burning fire at a property in the area, burning 3 cell phones and a laptop. They find the guy burning 3 cell phones and a laptop. So no shock here. Brad was literally arrested the very next day, October 9th. And all of that is in the arrest affidavit. There's also indictments that I've been going through. Brad, he was indicted by a grand jury on charges of murder. There were multiple counts of tampering with evidence, possession of a prohibited weapon, and aggravated assault with a weapon causing serious bodily injury. And just days after Brad was indicted, reporting started to come out that inside the indictment, investigators mentioned that Brad allegedly tried to hide a reciprocating saw. A reciprocating saw. Here is exactly what the indictment said. On or about October 8th, 2024, Brad Chandler Simpson did then and there, knowing that an investigation was in progress, namely a missing persons investigation, conceal a thing, namely a reciprocating saw, with the intent to impair its availability as evidence in the investigation. And then, so family members would later say that authorities informed them, and this is again some really damning evidence, that Suzanne's DNA was found on that saw. But the handsaw wasn't the only thing that Brad was hiding from police. Remember earlier I said that his friend Cotter was arrested for tampering with evidence. Well, authorities say Cotter went into Brad's gun room on October 8th, the day before Brad was arrested, and removed an AK-47 that was illegally modified and then hid it behind a TV mounted on the wall of his bedroom in his own home. I mean, there's so much evidence here. Remember I mentioned that there was this history of abuse that's come up. It wasn't just Suzanne's mom who had heard about it. Suzanne also apparently told her personal banker about her troubles with Chad. She'd alluded to domestic violence is the way she described it. And just weeks before, joked that if anything should happen to her, to look for her in the lake. She said that, to look for her in the lake, according to the banker. She also told that banker that sometimes Brad would take her phone from her. And if that is not bad enough, the couple's 5-year-old daughter once told school officials that Brad had hit Susan in the face. So when you see all of this in the indictment and the police reports, it seems like a slam dunk case. All the suspicious evidence, reports of domestic violence, of course, the missing wife. But remember, Suzanne's body has never been found. And that's despite investigators digging through the dump for weeks. I mean, they were really investigating and looking for her. And because the body hasn't been found, that gave Brad's defense team an opportunity. And they filed these motions to quash part of the indictment. They were saying that, look, without a body, the murder charge was just too vague, and prosecutors had failed to specify how exactly Suzanne died because they didn't have the body. Well, that motion was ultimately denied, but it's going to be interesting to see what role that plays in court, because the fact there's not a body will clearly come up at the trial. The motion to squash wasn't the only wrench in the works this year, slowing down the judicial process. The state, they've been having a hard time meeting some of these discovery deadlines and turning key evidence over to the defense. There was an August 1st deadline given by a judge, came and went. Prosecutors were forced to ask for an extension. And the reason, though, is, I mean, it's a big deal. It's because of the disaster response from the Hill Country flooding. Remember the 4th of July, awful floods. That apparently has slowed down some things with the investigation. But even with more time, the state had to ask again for an extension so that they could do a deep dive into the couple's finances. They wanted to dive apparently into life insurance, which you can imagine that could play a role here. Because the more they investigate, the more it looks like Suzanne was the primary breadwinner while Brad's business was floundering. His business apparently wasn't doing well. She was doing well financially. And it's possible that in the end, and we'll have to see at the trial, but it's possible that that could end up being part of the motive. I'm joined right now by Ambrosio Rodriguez, a defense attorney and former prosecutor in California. Just going through this whole Brad Simpson case, Ambrosio, like, if you were his attorney, I mean, where do you even start? Because it seems like there's a lot of evidence against him.
Yeah, look, if I was, my theory of the case, from what I've read, is that this was an act, something done in the heat of passion, right? And heat of passion can be once you lose control. So it wasn't a willful, premeditated murder, and that they got into whatever that night. There's plenty of evidence that there was a fight, there was a struggle, things of that nature, and that he lost it. I think it's a much safer defense to go for manslaughter than to go for not guilty. And you're talking about a really large difference in punishment, right? Murder carries life, and in Texas, I know it also carries death quite frequently, but manslaughter doesn't do that.
So when you say go for manslaughter, how does that work?
He would have to admit what he did. He would have to say, "Look, I lost my shit. We had been fighting over money. It had been building up over time. She was going up financially while I was going down. It caused all the stress, fighting and arguing. That night, she she said something, or it escalated, ran into the woods, and this is what I did. Once I realized what I had done, because out of sake for my children and panic, and I'm not proud of what I did, I try to cover up the crime. and this is how I did it. So I think that it is and it's worked before, even, and I know the, the argument against it is, well, sure, but didn't you, at the moment that you saw your wife, the mother of your child, dead, in those woods, realize what you did? Why did you come forward? Um, and you took all these steps, because then he has to admit to everything, right? The chopping up of the body, supposedly it's what happened based on the evidence we have, going to Home Depot, destroying of the evidence, everything. But this has worked before, right? This worked in a much more uh, maybe dramatic way with the Robert Durst case, when he kills his roommate, dismembers the body, puts it in plastic bags, and throws it into Galveston Bay. Right? And he got away, and the jury acquitted him of that. So the defense is there. I just sometimes, and it's happened to me, you'll have clients that will not want to take the smarter route. They will want to kind of go for it all. And sometimes, as a defense attorney, you just have to be happy with getting a single or a double, because a home run isn't going to happen.
Have you been in the situation where you've had to talk a client into it, or what are those discussions like?
They're not, yes, they're not. I have lost clients that decided to go with other attorneys because of my opinion of the case. But for those who have stayed, they have followed my advice, which is the best strategy going forward for trial and what it entails. Because, look, I said this before, and I'll keep saying it. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of murder, I've had about 300 murder cases in my career, both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. 5% have been an issue of who done it. The other 95% have been an issue of degree. And you would ask any professional, either as a prosecutor, defense attorney, homicide detective, they will give you the same statistics, right? And one of the things that's really stuck out when kind of going over all the media reports on this case is, and I've had this happen many times, is that your phone doesn't lie, right? And especially, I think we talked about this with the case out of Riverside, where the couple murdered their child. One
Mm.
of them just pled guilty, right?
Yeah, baby hair. Yeah,
Yeah.
Emmanuel. Yeah.
And that there's a crime that's done out of passion, right? That's done out of violence. And then there's the cleanup that comes afterwards. And that cleanup, that the defendants will try to make it better or hide the evidence or destroy evidence. You can't hide or destroy a phone. The evidence, the data from the phone becomes almost the thing that you cannot get away from. You can't explain away.
Wouldn't manslaughter still be like 25 years usually?
Not in California. In California, manslaughter carries 5, 7, or 11 years. I don't
Okay.
know what it is in Texas, but this is a concept that comes from common law. The idea that homicide is set in degrees, right? Because killing someone is the only act that there's no restitution for, right? You can never fully give restitution to the victim's family, right? You can't bring back somebody from the dead. So the way we punish it is based on what is in someone's heart and mind at the time of the act, right? Because if you and I get into like a stupid argument and I just shove you, right, which is a simple misdemeanor, but you slip and fall and you hit the back of your head in the worst possible way that causes an aneurysm and you die, that's involuntary manslaughter, right? It doesn't, to your family, it doesn't matter. You're still dead. But it's very different than if I plan your murder and kill you. The pain for the family is the same because you're gone. But the way that we as society hold you accountable or punish you is going to be different. And that's how we make distinctions and punishment for a crime that has no restitution.
And you mentioned it, but doesn't what he did afterwards come into play? I mean, it's not like he just immediately said, "Oh my God." And this is, he's obviously innocent until proven guilty, but according to police, he didn't just say, "Oh my God, I just did this crazy thing and call 911 and I lost my mind." Instead, according to police, he got a saw, perhaps chopped up the body, tried to cover the whole thing up.
You
Doesn't
wouldn't
that
have thought of that.
matter?
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's all very damning evidence, right? That the jury would take into account. But the question is, what else you got? Because it wasn't me, I don't think is a very good defense in this case. Not with what I've read. But it's better to have one solid defense than you can stick with and try to convince at least one juror than just kind of lose all credibility.
Is it sometimes about, is the goal sometimes literally just convincing one juror? I guess that's all that really matters, right?
Well, sometimes it is because at least you get a chance to negotiate the case. Like sometimes, look, the goal is never to get a hung jury, but sometimes you hope for a hung jury because of the weight of the evidence against your client, and so that you at least have an opportunity to negotiate the case in a way that wasn't negotiable before. And plus, nothing's ever guaranteed in a trial. There's some trials, obviously, that the evidence is so overwhelming that the case just kind of feels like a slow plea.
Mm.
But but you cannot think that way as a defense attorney. As a defense attorney, you always have to find a way to try to win. There, 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 there has to be optimism. You have to be an eternal optimist when you plan your case and when you walk into that courtroom and when you face the jurors. And I think that, at least for me, the only way to do that is to have a plan. And so, for example, in this particular case, a plan of manslaughter, which makes more sense. And at least you're not, because at least the jury doesn't feel like it's being lied to, being BS'd, right? Or you're just finding little things to pull at as opposed to a narrative to give them.
What about the fact that Suzanne Simpson's body has never been found? Um, and they, it sounds like his defense tried to file some motions to get everything thrown out because of that, which didn't work. But a bodiless homicide, does that help the defense?
To an extent. I mean, I think that in in the kind of not just media and podcasts and the true crime world and everything and documentaries, no body homicides make for great print. But in the real in kind of the cases that I've seen over and over and over, it's not the fact that a body is not there doesn't necessarily mean that the prosecution can't get a conviction, right? It's like sometimes when I speak with potential clients or their families, like, well, they never found a gun. I'm like, well, they found four bullet holes in the victim. Somebody shot him. Whether they find the murder weapon or not is, you know, that's important if you're playing Clue, not if you're doing a murder trial. Sometimes the weapon just isn't going to be found. The same thing with the body, where there's no evidence this woman disappeared. The evidence is she went screaming into the woods and never seen again, and she was being chased by the defendant. I don't. What's he going to do? Testify that a bear took her? You know what I mean? Like,
But does it add just doubt?
I don't think so. I've never. I don't know of a case where the jury came back not guilty because there was no body.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean there aren't, but if there are not guilty because there was a nobody homicide, I would I feel pretty safe in betting that there were other issues with the case that led to you know the not guilty verdict, not because there's no body.
Do you think there was ever thought among prosecutors, I mean, put on your prosecutor hat for a second, to work a deal with him to find out where the body is?
That's a great question. The It is not uncommon where there is an agreement to lower maybe from first to second degree. If, hey, what happened to the body, you know let us know, and that way that she can have a proper burial, the family can have some peace with it, and maybe those conversations happened and it was just a no. We'll never know. That would have been something that would be pretty confidential between the defense lawyer and the DA and the client, but that does happen. So,
The evidence is just so, at least to me, it seems like very, very strong against him. I mean, granted, there's no body, but everything else seems to just not look good for him. Um, when you're a defense attorney and you're in a situation like this, I mean, is it sort of, if the guy has the money, is it sort of like, what is there to lose? Let's just go to trial. I mean, because it doesn't look easy, like with
right,
the way things are set up for him.
right. I mean, look, even if forget being a private attorney, even if you're a public defender, there's sometimes you're just going to go to trial. Sometimes the only offer is a fair and just trial, and that's it. That is part of it. Not not every case. In fact, um, most cases are very very favored for the prosecution to win. Trials are not usually overwhelmingly are not kind of a 50-50 chance of as who's going to win, right? The prosecution gets to decide what cases to file. The prosecution gets to negotiate gets to negotiate a case. Um, and if a case is weak, the prosecution is going to try to plea it out and get rid of it. Um, and so um, I would imagine that there's never been an offer on this case because of the evidence against it. It's almost like if you kind of make a graph in your head, right, where like one line is the amount of time that someone is exposed to, and then that will be a horizontal line. A vertical line is the time that the level of evidence, right? And then you kind of make this diagonal line where would be the offer. So there's always a connection between like the evidence, the amount of evidence in a case, and the amount of exposure that someone is subject to. Like I once had a murder case that I was able to plead down to an assault with probation because of evidentiary issues, right? In a situation like that, so I'm I make that or give that example because the only reason that it's going to trial, a murder case goes to trial, is because the prosecution feels that they have enough to win. That's why it's very hard to win a murder case for the defense because all the weak ones have either been not filed or been pled down to lower charges because the defendant is like, I'm not going to take the chance of, spending the life in prison if I can do 4 years or 5 years or whatever.
You mentioned, I mean, one speculation about the motive is that because she was doing better with her work and his work was declining and, she was making more money. Um, does there have to be I mean, does there have to be a motive? Is that something you think that
No,
jurors want?
no, there doesn't need to be a motive other than wanting, obviously wanting her dead, right? Having that intent. But I brought that up as a narrative to use in a defense of heat of passion, right? It's not, it doesn't put him in a good light, but none of this obviously puts him in a good light. And so, but no, you don't need motive. In fact, the jury instructions in California, I'm sure it's the same in most states, is that the prosecution doesn't have to prove a motive. They have to prove the elements of the crime, not a motive to do it.
All these
Sometimes the
particular,
motives are understood, right? There's kind
yeah,
of some.
yeah, makes sense. With all the particulars about him buying the saw and the phone activity, like you were saying about and turning the phone off, does the defense have to explain every one of those things? Try to explain away, or do they just ignore them, or how, like, I mean, it just seems like it would be a lot to overcome.
I agree with what you just said. It's a lot to overcome. Look, and the there are different. There's two schools of thought, right? I guess the old school of thought for defense was you don't need to explain. You can attack as it comes, and then go from there. I don't think that's as effective as having an explanation for something as bad as cement, right, in
Yeah.
cash, right? And so I think there has to be an explanation, and I think that's and it really kind of really comes down to who this person, who Mr. Simpson is as a human being, because and whether or not, and I don't mean to, this is going to sound crass, but I don't mean it, whether or not he can sell it, right? I can tell within a couple of minutes whether or not I'm going to put my client on the stand or not. Can How does he look? How does he appear? What kind of energy does he give? Can he communicate? Can he explain himself? All those things matter, right? And I'll go back to the Fred Durst case where he's in trial for murder and dismembering this man and throwing his body parts out into the bay, and he made the jury laugh twice. And so who he is matters, and his ability to communicate and connect with people, right? And this case is going to get one of the reasons this case is getting a lot of publicity is because they're wealthy people. This is a wealthy part of San Antonio. This is a country club world, right? The night begins at a country club event.
Mm-hmm.
And country clubs are expensive. I mean, anywhere from, depending on the club, anywhere from 10,000 to $1 million just to join, and then all the fees. So there's a certain world that kind of comes with it, and so I think people are always going to be fascinated when the rich kill.
Have you, and you mentioned like, you would be trying to get him to admit to some of it, or have you had clients where they just don't take your advice and you just have to go along with it because they're paying you?
If they, well, if they're not taking my advice, if they don't want to do it my way, then I don't want the case. I separate myself from the case because it's not worth it to me.
Is it ever too late though? Like you're too involved and they change their mind and you just have to.
Has that happened where sorry,
No,
I'm
because I'm just wondering, like maybe right now, this trial scheduled for the beginning of the year, are his lawyers trying to talk him into something and he's saying the opposite, or.
yeah, maybe. I mean, look, those are two different things. So it is, if the client has the ultimate choice as to whether to take a deal or a trial, right? I've had many situations where I'm like, I think it's better for you to take a deal than to take a trial, and my client has decided to go to trial. If you decide to go to trial, that's ultimately your decision as my client. If you're going to go to trial, we're going to do the trial my way, or we're not going to do the trial, or somebody else is going to do the trial. And that to me is non-negotiable as an attorney. I learned that from, look, I had the good luck of having Sam Dash as my criminal law professor at law school. And Sam Dash, for everyone under the age of 55, 60, Sam Dash was one of the lead prosecutors during Watergate. And he was also not just a professor at Georgetown, but became very famous in the 60s and 70s for representing people in the Jimmy Hoffa circle and a lot of people high up in the mafia families. And he gave us all this advice about, look, if you're going to take cases like this, then you have to be in control, and you always have to be in control of the case. Uh, and don't ever mess around with their money, which is great advice. So I've always had the attitude of, look, if we don't want to do it the way I want to do, if you don't want to do this trial my way, then go find somebody else, because I'm not a puppet. I'm not here to have my strings pulled and
Mm.
parrot whatever you tell me to say. No, there's no, I just don't do that.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about that, especially like in the tense time leading up to a trial and kind of what's going on behind the scenes in this case.
There should be and I'm sorry to kind of butt in, but there should be I think of being being your lawyer as kind of having a very intense marriage for however long that marriage lasts, right? And so that buy-in from the client as to what your strategy is has to be at the beginning. And that has to be a relationship that is built on trust and understanding and mutually working together. It shouldn't it shouldn't be like the day of trial, be like, I don't like that strategy, that's not what we're doing,
Mm. Right.
right? And be like, well, I get to make the strategic calls in a trial as your lawyer. You get to choose whether to go to trial or not. If you want to fire me today, I'll tell the judge that I have a conflict of interest, and we can do that. I'll put that on the record. So, I mean, those are all things that can happen. But, and look, there each every lawyer of any kind has been burned by a client. That happens. It's happened to me in the past. It'll happen to me in the future. And it's whether you do criminal defense, bankruptcy, whatever. But overall, you still want to have, you want to have the consistency of having those bonds with the client.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, as always, I appreciate your time, Ambrosio.
Oh, I love talking to you, Brian. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.